Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I am Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhyme Synthesia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is the emotional adventure of mischievous mono-colored squares and rectangles in 2012's Thomas Was Alone.
Following that is 2018's The Messenger, the time-traveling action platformer Metroidvania that pays homage to Ninja Gaiden with 8 and 16-bit graphics and tunes. So, tell us, dear viewers, what is it like being in a world where Avengers Endgame is already out? Because we are still here in pre-Endgame world, not to give you too much of an in-depth look into our recording schedule and habits, but that must be something living in that world.
Yeah, I go see it tomorrow, and I'm really excited.
I have to wait another day.
Don't spoil me, comments in the future.
Well, no, by that time when they hear it, it's already been out, you'll know and all that, but don't spoil it for other people. Don't be a jerk.
Yeah, don't do that. Be cool. This has been a big week for media releases.
It sure has. Be cool like these two indie games. Sometimes you like to have little themes on our episodes, and this week it's really definitely focusing on the indies, for sure. One goes very hard on the chiptunes, one kind of sprinkles it into other synths and sort of MIDI orchestration, but the graphics for these games kind of run the gamut of, as you said, for this first game. I mean, squares and rectangles that are, one color, different colors, but simple graphics in that sense, to my game, which kind of goes between 8 and 16-bit graphics and explores those dynamics. So, really good soundtracks today. I'm really excited to hear you talk about Thomas Was Alone, though.
Let's just jump on into it then. Thomas Was Alone was originally released for the PC in 2012, and has since made its way to PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, Android and iOS, Xbox One, PS4, and Wii U. I am kind of surprised not to see the Switch on that list, but hey, sure, maybe someday.
I mean, it is kind of an older indie game. I mean, yeah, maybe someday. But yeah, it's a whole lot of other platforms to play it on.
It is the first full game developed by Mike Bithell, who nowadays is kind of a big name in indie games. He's made 2 games, technically 4, but Thomas Was Alone is really the reason why people know Mike Bithell's name around this industry. It is a game about a bunch of AIs represented by simple squares that sort of gain self-awareness and just become friends along the way, with a main focus being on an AI specifically named Thomas, who starts the game off alone, as the name might imply.
Mike Bithell is a cool dude. I'm really glad he got this big break in the industry, because he's trying really cool things with his different game releases, especially as of late. There's one I'm blanking on the name, but it was just surprise, I've made a game. It's out today. I'm going to try these sort of small piecemeal episodic games. I mean, and he's fascinating to listen to on podcasts. So I'm really glad the indie scene has worked out for him.
Yeah, I haven't played any of his other games. Thomas Was Alone is the only game I've played. He's also made Volume is the other big game that he is known for, which apparently I gotta play Volume just for the soundtrack, because every single interview with the composer was about Volume, with a small mention of Thomas Was Alone somewhere in there. Because it was the same composer for both games.
That I didn't know. That's really interesting. I mean, a Volume's more of a Metal Gear Solid kind of throwback, but it's very different than this game.
Thomas Was Alone is a puzzle platformer, 2D puzzle platformer. The original was a Flash-based prototype that Bithell developed in 24 hours as part of a personal game jam while he was working at the company Blitz Games. And that game was put up on Congregate for free, and within its first week had been played 100,000 times.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So the idea behind the entire game was the concept of friendship, and Bithell decided the best way to sort of portray that was have multiple blocks that had their own abilities and the abilities to sort of mesh with each other, to work with each other to get through certain levels. One of the things that inspired him, according to Bithell, is the film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Based on the idea of people being chained together and then being forced to work together to escape a situation.
I feel like the soundtrack would be pretty different if it used that soundtrack in this game.
For instance, in this game, you've got Thomas, who is just a square, and all he can really do is jump. He jumps really good, but he can jump, and that's about all he can do. But then you have other ones. Forgive me, I played this game in like 2013. That was 6 years ago. I don't remember all the names, but there's one that is a giant square that can float in water, and most of the time your goal with her is to have everybody else ride on her to get across water, because water kills all the AIs except for her. Or there's one that is a very short and wide rectangle that is a trampoline if the other squares jump on him.
Oh, okay.
And so all of them have different abilities. One can double jump. One has his gravity reversed all the time. And the idea is you just use their powers together to get to the end of a level. And it's really interesting. Sometimes can get a tad bit overwhelming, in my opinion, when you have like 7 of them and you need to like cycle through all of them to make it through certain puzzles, but never enough that it takes away from the game. But I do remember at one point that it was like, man, there might be a few too many in this specific level for me to deal with. That's just a vague feeling that I have memories of. After the immense success of the prototype, Bithell decided, all right, let's make a full version of this game. He fleshed out a bunch of stuff. He wrote a script, which we'll get to in a second. He fixed some problems with the controls that he had sort of noticed when he was playing the prototype that went up on Congregate. And in 2012, obviously, it came out. The full version of Thomas was an excuse that Bithell used to teach himself Unity, which, as somebody that is learning Unity right now or has kind of a basic knowledge of Unity, that is both easy and also the hardest thing on the face of the earth. Unity can be a very nice thing to work with sometimes, especially in 2D. It actually works surprisingly well for 2D games. Or Unity can be the bane of your existence, and it can be both of these within the span of an hour. So this is usually for people that want to get into game development. This is the best way to learn, is just make a game. Just make it. It's going to suck. The first one you make is going to suck. But just make a game. So I found that really, 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 really interesting. He decided to stick with the rectangle characters because he had been inspired by the minimalist works of Piet Mondrian, who I've never heard of, but apparently he's known for minimalist stuff. And the whole game's aesthetic was basically just built around minimalism. All the characters are squares. All the environments are squares. They're all black. Sometimes there's some white there. And it just all meshes together really well. And in order to enhance the experience and provide more story, like I mentioned before, Bithell wrote a script. This script was meant to give all of the rectangles their own personalities. And the humor in the script, according to him, was based on comedians Douglas Adams, who is known as the writer of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and Danny Wallace, who would actually become the game's narrator. Apparently, this was the result of an Indiegogo campaign and Bithell asking very nicely. So, I believe they raised like 2,000 euros is the number I saw to get Wallace to do the narration. And that actually became one of the most notable parts of the game, was the narration.
So, Danny Wallace, for those that don't know, Sean Hastings from the Assassin's Creed series, especially the earlier games with Desmond Miles. So, that very specific British voice and tone. Very memorable for those that have played Assassin's Creed games, especially earlier ones.
Actually, didn't know that. Interesting. The game became notable largely through word of mouth, with help from the developer of Another World, Eric Chahi, as well as something I didn't know about before researching this game, an April Fool's video that was made alongside the motion capture studio Audio Motion about how Thomas's animations were created through extensive motion capture.
Okay, that I have seen. I've seen that. That is really good.
I have. That sounds amazing. I need to look it up after this episode.
It kind of reminds me of the one time with like The Witcher 3 and they did like the Roach motion capture. Yeah, that's also very good.
The music for Thomas Was Alone was done by David Housden, and unfortunately I could not find anything about this man's early life before Thomas Was Alone, except for the fact that he was in a band. I can tell you that much. And according to him, he basically decided that he was going to get out of playing for bands and more into like composing for stuff pretty much the instant he finished university. Bithell got in contact with him because of a mutual friend who had gone to one of Housden's band's concerts. So, as he puts it, it was kind of cool to see how that one insignificant thing led to this giant development in the future. And I agree. That's really, really cool. Thomas Was Alone was his first big project in the games industry. He has since, of course, done Volume. He did the soundtrack for Cube 2. He scored the film The Hit Squad, which I've never heard of, but it was listed on his website as his first feature film score, so I figured I'd mention it at least. And he is currently doing the soundtrack for the upcoming game Take a Seat, which I had not heard of before researching this, but it's like a narrative game about a husband and wife working through issues or something. And it sounds very interesting, and knowing he's at the helm makes me a lot more interested too.
David Housden is also nominated for an award recently. Our Twitter account over at Soundchat OST. If you're curious on like the different Twitter accounts of the composers that we highlight, if they have one, go check our follows. Notice that Austin Wintry was praising a group of composers who recently got nominated for this award, and notice David Housden was among them. So, I mean, like, this is just like today before we're recording, and it's like, found that very interesting. I can't remember what it's for. My apologies. But, like, does good work, certainly.
I will say it was kind of hard to find information on him because his website, if you go down to the latest news section on his personal website, it's articles from 2016. So it's a little outdated. I only knew about Take a Seat because of IMDb. It lists that. That might not be accurate. Hoping it is, because I've already said it. Now, historical development research. Again, I could mostly find interviews with him about Volume, but I did find some things about the Thomas Was Alone soundtrack. For instance, Housden claims that he initially had issues figuring out what kind of music to write because, well, I mean, the characters are squares. What are you supposed to do with that? And then, which I found super interesting, much like the player is supposed to, when he began attributing human characteristics to the squares, he suddenly had a lot more of an idea of what to write.
Well, in a way, I think that's also, writing based on human experience, like write on what you know. If you start associating human characteristics to inanimate objects, you're going to probably naturally have associations with other humans that you kind of tie those characteristics to, and what would it be like to write music for them, but just applied to this object? I mean, that's my guess on what the creative process for that would be like. I mean, take what you know and what you can associate with those kind of human experiences, but just apply it to this other thing.
Bethel apparently originally wanted the music to be procedurally generated, which I am not nearly smart enough to even begin to tell you how that would work.
Algorithms, son.
I guess. Housden found this difficult at first, but in the end they decided to use, quote, a procedurally generated assembly of multiple instrument tracks over a fixed song line to keep the feel Bithell was looking for. Again, take from that what you will. I'm just quoting them directly.
So if I had to guess, like, yeah, there's a melody line that goes through, but maybe based on certain things that are happening in the game that could cause certain instruments to rise and take the lead, or have this instrument play the melody instead of what is normally. That would be my guess. Like, yeah, kind of take what's going on in game and have it adapt to like what the main melody and flow of the song is.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. Because spoiler alert, I tried to go watch a long play or skim through a long play before doing this episode because I wanted to refresh myself at least a little bit on the game. And these songs sound completely different in the game. Not completely different, but I think that might actually be what it is now that I think about it. In game, they're adding and subtracting instruments. Maybe,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. I mean, again, we've talked about in past episodes of the show, if you're a loyal listener, how, game music is almost like a three-dimensional thing. But when you have the soundtrack, it's collapsing it to that 2D experience. I think that was the Assassin's Creed Syndicate soundtrack. We were talking about that idea again with Austin Wintory. But yeah, I mean, there can be so many variables in games that could adjust depending on how the music is written, how you hear it in game. But yeah, to kind of boil it down to its essence for the soundtrack and for those individual tracks.
Overall, it is a very minimalist score. It makes use of pianos, strings, and then a lot of synth bleeps and bloops. Like literally bleeps and bloops.
Yeah, no, it's kind of the most accurate representation there.
Entertainment Weekly described it with a quote that I really love. They described it as beautiful, with the blips of electronic music starting as staccato interruptions in an otherwise acoustic score, but slowly growing to replace those instruments in a way that represents how the game's own AI characters are trying to escape.
Yeah, that is a really nice quote.
I didn't notice that until I read that quote and then went back and listened to the songs that I picked and was like, oh, that's accurate. Speaking of, let's get into 5 critical tracks about Thomas Was Alone. Let's start with Where Are You? This is the very first song that you hear in the entire game. It is the title screen song. It starts as a quiet, calm piano piece with blips just phasing in and out and stereo sound. And looking back on it, this song feels really emotional in regards to the overall plot of the game. And it also just builds slowly and slowly has this bigger balance of instrument and synth, and then the synths become slightly more prominent as the song goes on, and in a way it's kind of just the story of the game being told in one piece, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a really nice piece. It is almost like the bleeps and bloops, but it's like sounds a little bit away like an electric guitar that comes in for that short staccato bit. Like that jumps out as like a fresh instrument among the piano, the string sort of MIDI sound. It's a fresh electronic sound, and like it really punctuates it nicely.
Electric guitar would make sense because that is implemented later on in the soundtrack as well. Though it might actually just be strings put through an amp.
Very well could be that too, yeah.
Sounds roughly the same. Either way, yeah, it's that specific sound. After that, we have Ghosts of the Past. This one is a little bit more melancholy than a lot of other songs. Like, obviously, this game has some melancholy tones to it, because the game's called Thomas Was Alone.
Mm-hmm.
The synth's not super prominent in this song, and when it does show up, it kind of feels to me like it is, as the quote from Entertainment Weekly would say, it's trying to break through the instruments. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it ever fully succeeds in this piece specifically, because I think it's always slightly overpowered by this guitar that's playing above it. And I associate this song, this is one that you're going to notice for people that are super knowledgeable about this game. I associate these songs with certain moments, and I'm not entirely sure if they're the moments that actually where the song is playing, but for some reason, that moment and that song became intertwined in my memory, and I can't really separate the two. So for this one, it's with the Splitter, the first time you encounter the Splitter, which is an entity in universe that is meant to separate AIs that accidentally end up in the same area, because they're not supposed to do that. So the first time you encounter one and then suddenly everybody's alone again, that's what I associate the song with.
I really like the key of this one overall. And I'm not going to get into music theory into it, but it sounds to me like C minor. And like if there's a key that I just my ear picks up on and like really likes the sound of it's that C minor E flat sort of key, and it always kind of just goes for this. Yeah, you're right. This sorrowful, melancholy, sort of wistful tone, and yeah, it is kind of sad in that sense, but it's also really well done.
After that, we have A Time for Change. This song feels determined to me. Like, we need to rebuild the world to be a better place. And it starts out with very strong piano, but as it goes on, the synth just starts to overpower the piano, which again builds into that theme. I never even noticed this theme, and now I'm noticing it everywhere. It's so cool. I don't know if it plays in this section again, but I associate this piece with Thomas having just jumped into what they refer to as the Fountain of Knowledge, which in universe I believe is just a leak that leads to a connection to the internet. And the quote that comes right after that moment, which is, Thomas was connected to the internet for 12 seconds and he had seen everything. He had seen the cats who couldn't spell. He had heard of the arrow through the knee. He felt that there was a thing called cake, but that it was a lie. Like, usually when those jokes are made, it's the cringiest thing on earth. Mm-hmm. But like, an AI connects to the internet for the first time, and 3 of the most overused memes at the time are the first thing he sees? No, yeah, that checks out.
It's pretty accurate. I mean, yeah, you say most overused memes at the time for 7 years ago. I mean,
yeah.
So yeah, now it's just like, geez, how dated can you get? But no, like for the time, yeah, no, absolutely.
And I don't know, I've always found that quote to be very funny. And after this moment, Thomas decides, all right, everybody, we have to go do this thing at a place called the Creation Matrix, because we need to rebuild the world so that we AIs aren't just like doing puzzles. We can have lives. We can go do things. We can make a better world for the others that come after us. Which becomes a central theme of the game, which is sometimes you got to make sacrifices so that those who come after you can have a better life.
Neat.
After that is my absolute favorite song in the game, Escape. In my opinion, this is the most powerful piece in the game, and for the most part, it's almost entirely synth. Which, again, builds into that theme. This is them having finally figured out what they need to do. They need to go jump into the creation matrix, and this will kill them, but it will kill them in a way that spreads their knowledge all over the computer system that they're a part of, and other AIs will be able to escape. Again, I don't know if this is the part where the piece plays, but that's the part that I associate it with, as well as this line that I had to go look up that meme line. I didn't have to look up well, I did to get it perfectly right, but I remembered the gist of this line, and I've remembered it for 6 years, which is, Thomas knew he'd never meet Nathan Fillion or a Transformer, he'd never get to visit Gotham City or eat at movies, it didn't matter. If he and his friends jumped into the creation matrix, they could give everyone else in the simulation a chance to.
Aww.
This song is so emotional and actually manages to bring tears to my eyes when I listen to it, just because of that moment that I don't even think this song plays during that moment. And yet that's the moment I associate it with.
Yeah, whereas A Time for Change is, certainly determined piano. This, and I hate to bring up Austin Wintory again, but we're going to make another reference to him. In Austin Wintory's Journey, there's the track Apotheosis, where it's like the full realization, and it's like, we're doing this, we're going to do the big thing. And that's what this piece reminds me of. And, without playing the game, like, I don't have experience with playing Thomas Was Alone, but just from the sound of it, it sounds like a different kind of determined, but more of an accomplished one.
Yeah, that sounds accurate to me. Yeah, this is the one I go back to and listen to over and over again, and there's a reason for it. After that, we have Freedom. So after Thomas and his friends jump into the creation matrix, it spreads these fields all around the upper areas of the computer system where the other AIs are. And it makes these colored sort of fields where if those AIs jump through them, they get the powers of Thomas and his friends, depending on what color they're jumping through. And this song plays as those new AIs, who you do actually go play as, make their way to the portal that lets them escape. And they are successful in escaping. Throughout the game, there are little snippets of interviews with people that were involved with the Thomas incident that led to AIs becoming sentient and just becoming a part of life. And one of those quotes comes from an AI that would go on to become an AI civil rights lawyer. This song just has this optimistic swell to it that really does have the idea of it's gonna be okay. There's a future, and you guys are building it as we speak.
It's a powerful message. It sure sounds like it.
So as for songs on the cutting room floor, I don't have a lot to say about these other than I just think they're kind of good. But first off is the song Hope. Which, as the name would imply, is a hopeful piece. And then there's another of the melancholy songs, Alone Again. So what will I never forget about this game? The question that I think Mike Bithell was trying to ask, and the question that everybody associated this game with back in 2012, is can you make somebody emotionally invested in a bunch of monocolored squares? And it turns out the answer is a resounding yes. The game was super well received. As of April 2014, it has had over 1 million copies sold, and that's not including the people who got a hold of it when it was free on PS Plus. I don't remember when. I think it was relatively recently.
It was actually in 2014, I think, and I know this because I knew it was a PS Plus game at one point. I'm like, oh, I should play this game before this episode. And it was one that I either was not subscribed at the time or I didn't grab, and it was just not in my library, and it broke my heart because I also wanted to play it on PlayStation Vita. I couldn't. So
darn.
I may have to now go play this game. Just go and buy it and play it.
I would recommend it. It's not a very long game. It can be beaten in like 2-3 hours, if I remember correctly. It won a BAFTA for Danny Wallace's performance as the narrator, and at the same time was nominated for a BAFTA for Best Story and Best Original Score, though it did not win those two. And the score itself was an honorable mention at the 2013 IGF Awards. And like I said before, I think the main takeaway that I'll always keep from this game is that it's a game about making personal sacrifices so that the people that come after you can have a better life. I think that's a very important message. That's a very important message even today. I think
it's pretty critical today. I mean, yeah, all the kudos to Mike Bithell. I mean, makes great games. But this score, it really stands out, and it sounds like it fits the game exceptionally well.
I would agree. So, for our transition, we try to highlight a fan cover or remix, whether it be from YouTube or OC Remix. And for me, I want to highlight the YouTuber Laura Platt, who did an orchestral remix of Escape. So, enjoy that.
Let's go from talking about a game about squares and rectangles to a game about ninjas.
The same thing.
Exactly the same thing. They throw ninja stars, which are shaped very differently than squares or rectangles.
I don't know where this joke is going, but I like it.
So this is The Messenger. And when you Google search The Messenger, I mean, the title of this game makes a lot of sense for the game itself, but it's just awful in Google SEO. Like, you can't always find the game. You got to put The Messenger Game 2018, especially when it came out in 2018. And as someone who is very interested in The Messenger and tried to play it in the first couple weeks, trying to find where you get stuck at certain points, it's not easy to Google where you are. And it's like, help on certain parts of The Messenger. What's The Messenger? Well, thanks, Google. The Messenger is a game that was released for PC and Nintendo Switch on August 30th, 2018. It just came to PlayStation 4 about a month or so ago on March 19th, 2019. It was developed by Sabotage Studio, and they're based out of Quebec, and it was published by Devolver Digital. The premise of The Messenger, essentially, it's a time-traveling, action-platforming Metroidvania adventure that goes back and forth between 8 and 16-bit graphics and tunes on the soundtrack. Clearly, with the ninja gameplay, has a clear inspiration from Ninja Gaiden. The overall plot involves a ninja village being attacked by an evil demon king when a supposed Western hero appears and fulfills a legendary prophecy by giving a scroll to one of the surviving ninjas of the village. The Western hero appoints this ninja, which is you as the protagonist, as the messenger and tells him to deliver the scroll to the top of a mountain in this land in which you live in. Now, along this journey, the messenger discovers that he'll have to travel through time to collect notes in a melody that breaks the curse that is upon the land. So this game is a big passion project of one Thierry Boulanger. And Thierry is the director, he's the writer, and since he is a programmer by trade, he is one of the two game designers. But Thierry Boulanger wanted to make a game like this. He's had this game in his mind since he was 8 years old and drawing ninjas all the time. And so less than 20 years later, he's able to work as a programmer, kind of build up his skills. And this game is made in Unity as well, believe it or not. So when he gets the chance to make his own independent game studio of Sabotage, he gathers a team of those that he wanted to work with and made this game, The Messenger, which I think that's always really neat when you think of like indie stories, and you don't always hear of like, when I was a kid, I wanted to make this game and then I got to, like, we've talked about, lifelong dreams or like bucket list kind of things. Like Thierry Boulanger made his dream a reality.
I'm jealous. I also have game concepts that are like that I know that most of mine probably won't get made. It's very actually rare that somebody has a dream game like this that they've had since they were very young and it actually gets made. So yeah, that's actually super, super cool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a primary traversal mechanic in the game that a lot of the platforming is kind of developed around, and it's called cloud stepping. And I think it's just one of the things, like when you watch this game and you see the character kind of do these crazy things, especially when the game in a way is almost like built for speedruns. But the gist of cloud stepping is the mechanic of course, with a ninja, you have a sword strike, right? But when you land a successful sword strike, you can jump again. And there are different objects in the world that you can, hit with your sword that allow you to kind of, in a way, defy gravity. And then you'll get objects like you do in a Metroidvania where you get like a rope dart. And so if you're close enough to a wall, you kind of can throw out this rope dart and it'll pull you to the wall so you can climb up the wall. Just watching the platforming in this game, not only when you get to do it, it just makes you feel really cool like a ninja. That whole, action fulfillment sort of not prophecy, but just that feeling.
Fantasy fulfillment.
Yeah, the wish fantasy fulfillment. Thank you. But just seeing those who really master it at work and all the crazy things they get to do, especially speedrunners, it's just very, very cool. This game, when it was reviewed, ended up with a Metacritic around the mid-80s. So people really took to it well, which has to be super rewarding for Thierry and his team to see all that work really be fulfilled. It was nominated for Best Independent Game, and it won Best Debut Indie Game at the Game Awards 2018. I personally, when it came to like indie games of 2018, I put it up against Celeste a lot. And I know people like Celeste, like another difficult, 2D platformer. And Celeste has a whole lot going for it with its story, with its soundtrack. But I actually preferred The Messenger more last year. And maybe that's like a minority opinion out there because, yeah, Celeste did a whole lot of great things for a lot of people. But I feel like a lot of people still slept on The Messenger. And so part of why I'm bringing it up and, having it be one of the newest games that we've talked about on this show is really just to highlight not only this game, but its soundtrack. But if you're curious, do consider that The Messenger has free DLC coming in the form of Picnic Panic, and that's supposed to arrive in June. It's kind of like after the big adventure's over, Thierry Boulanger kind of compares it to like a Christmas sort of story, just like a side story, kind of relaxing sort of thing, but more summer vacation kind of thing. It adds a few more levels, adds a few more bosses, but that's a free update as thanks for those who tried the game and made it so successful. The game's soundtrack really does stand out, though, as you get to the Metroidvania section of the game where you're shifting between 8-bit and 16-bit versions of the world, and how that changes up the platforming and the world design. In particular, the soundtrack changes along with it. So every song on the soundtrack that it applies to, where you can change the world, because 8-bit and 16-bit, it's, past and future kind of thing, or present and future. Every song that it applies to was recreated twice, in a sense. And it was all composed by one Eric W. Brown, who you may know more commonly by the name Rainbow Dragon Eyes.
I do not.
Well, that's interesting because he doesn't really have a background in places like OC Remix or things like that. Eric Brown, Rainbow Dragon Eyes, born August 28th, 1984 in Silver Spring, Maryland, currently based out of the Denver, Colorado area. Rainbow Dragon Eyes puts his own kind of description of himself on one of his social media websites as such. Rainbow Dragon Eyes began carving his own niche sometime around 2008 and has remained there ever since. Using primitive video game hardware such as the Nintendo Game Boy, NES, and Sega Genesis, he writes what can only be described as extreme chiptune dance metal, adding equal parts whimsical prose, anthemic melody, and unequivocal fury with his vocal assault. He has sailed around the world on tour at clubs, festivals, and conventions. His music can be heard on the internet and in video games such as Rock Band Network, Pump It Up Infinity, and an indie platformer to be released in 2018, which of course is The Messenger. So he has this really distinct focus on like really catchy songs with, kind of a metal sort of information set, but focused through chiptune and like 8 and 16-bit. And it really tells, and I can't wait to get to the critical tracks to have you guys hear what this sounds like. But he also kind of represents himself with a quote that I found very interesting from an anonymous source, but he says, quote, "After searching far and searching wide, past the shifting stars and flowing tides, the answer's not found in the heavens above. The wisdom I seek, the knowledge I bespeak, the questions profound as the declarations thereof." So I guess, just searching for meaning in music. And it's really deep. His writing style, I just really find so interesting because he has a drum background, primarily, Rainbow Dragon Eyes. And
that's the second one.
Yeah, right? We come from Christopher Madigan and Cuphead and, going with drums as like the main instrument that he plays, because he plays drums in different musical groups, including the American melodic death metal band known as Necrogoblicon, which that's a group that goes on tour. He has like a pirate metal band that he's a part of. So he's around a whole lot of music, and he's composed his own music for years. So it's not like Christopher Madigan was like, I don't know how to compose music. Let's compose Cuphead. No, Rainbow Dragon Eyes has been around a while for, making his own chiptune music. So that's not a new thing to him, certainly. But he hadn't really fully composed his own game score before. I mean, he makes his own songs, he makes his own albums with his music, but never really assigned fully to a game project. And so, in that sense, The Messenger was the first and really the only game he's fully composed for. I mean, he's back again for Picnic Panic, the DLC. It seems like there's further work with Thierry Boulanger and Sabotage to be had in the future. Because when it comes to the development history of The Messenger's soundtrack, Eric Brown, Rainbow Dragon Eyes, is Thierry Boulanger's favorite musician. So just like how the world connects in those interesting ways. I mean, Eric's touring with one of his bands and, Thierry learns that he's coming through to Quebec, and let's go to a show. I gotta talk to him after the show. I gotta meet him and see if I can pitch my game so that if he can possibly write the music for it. So Thierry catches him after a show in Quebec. He gushes. He feels like he wasn't, very eloquent in kind of pitching the gist. Like, it's this 8-bit game about ninjas and Rainbow Dragon Eyes. Eric Brown is just like, all right, I'll do it. I'll make the music for your game, and just kind of floored Thierry. So like that's where that sort of partnership sort of began. A quote about the goal of the soundtrack was apparently quite simply to make a bunch of badass tracks that aren't annoying or distracting to listen to, that don't feel out of place given the levels and environments, which also includes having 2 versions, 8 and 16-bit, of every track on hand.
This might be the first game that we're talking about, I think, that has like a dynamic soundtrack like that changes depending on a specific context like this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the only game that's done that. But I imagine that is not only hard to program, but hard to compose as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there are games that have done like the past and future and have, similar tracks and all that. But I think what makes The Messenger so interesting and what makes it really stand out when you watch trailers or pitches about the game is that this time travel happens on the fly. Like, there are breaks in the world that you cross over and it immediately changes. So yeah, that absolutely comes into play when there's platforming and level design and game design and all that. But like for some games, it'd be like, step in this portal and the world will load and we'll find some way to distract you in the meantime. No, it's you pass this barrier and it's the other time, the other sound, the other look. I mean, it's even to the point where the Messenger character like doesn't have a hat in the 8-bit, but then he gains a Raiden Mortal Kombat like sort of circular hat in the 16-bit. So like little things like that change, but I mean it's right when you jump over. And I think that's one of the really unique things about the Messenger. So when you're listening to the soundtrack and it sounds like one way, like NES chipset, you cross over and it's picking up right at that exact spot in Genesis. Like it's so cool. If you're wondering how it gets composed and created, Rainbow Dragon Eyes said that most of the tracks were written with 8-bit in mind first. And that doing the track twice, in a way, he said, gave him a chance to remix himself, which is really interesting to think about in a way. You write a piece mostly for 8-bit, and then with 16-bit, you have a wider range of overall instrument sounds. And it's like, how can I interpret this sound into this and then put my own kind of spin on it? Really, really interesting stuff. He credited a couple programs specifically for the exact sort of sounds because the 8-bit was an NES target sound and the 16-bit was a Genesis or Mega Drive target chip sound. For the 8-bit, he used a 0cc Famitracker, which apparently is also the same software that Jake Kaufman used for Shovel Knight. So if you're wondering why it has the same sort of NES sound, that's probably why. And then the program Deflamask was used for the 16-bit sound, which also really tries to emulate that Genesis sound.
That is such a cool way to sort of, because you said it's time travel, right? I know very little about The Messenger, just for any listeners. I haven't played it yet. It's been on my list for a while. I just haven't had a chance to buy or play it. But I had no idea. That is such a cool way to sort of portray time travel in game and in the context of music. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's on the fly. It's just so cool when those kind of moments happen, especially when you are helplessly, over like a big gap and, you have to make the jump into nothing, but there's that sort of time slip and you're making that blind leap of faith. And sure enough, when you cross over, there's something for you to either rope dart to or slash and cloud step. It's just like you're taking like those chances and the music changes to the different instrument sets to go along with it, and then maybe you have to go back as a result. It's really cool once it really opens up to that sort of Metroidvania game design. So what does this sound like in actual practice? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's get to the 5 critical tracks. A little different, of course, with this kind of soundtrack compared to previous. I mean, we'll use 2 songs because they're the ones that are tangentially related to each other with the 8 and the 16-bit versions. And I'll play, it's like 15 seconds of each basically, but make, the split and have it transition right at that same point. So just by listening, you'll get a sense of what is it like to kind of cross over on the fly. We'll start for the first one with Hills of Destiny and Hills of Intent. So this is a very memorable set of tracks from the game because this comes from the first level with like real actual progressible gameplay. I mean, there's a first level, the Ninja Village, where kind of the exposition of the story gets laid out. But once the messenger has scroll in hand and has to take off, there's this first level, and it's Autumn Hills. Definitely a lot of elements with this song in play, especially this this higher pitched bend. It kind of makes this song like one of the bigger earworms on the soundtrack that you'll hear it and you'll just get stuck in your head for a long time. And it's especially memorable for speedrunners because for those that are doing, multiple takes, multiple attempts, you're going through this level a lot and like you're kind of cutting your teeth on this one. But for most of the players, it's you've learned the fundamentals of cloud stepping in this ninja village before the Demon King has struck and the village is burning. You have to go take the scroll. You've learned the basics, but now it's putting it in practice with actual enemies. You're using your blade. You're cutting them down. You're eventually gaining more abilities. So your cuts, your blade strikes can actually cut through and nullify projectiles. So like when enemies are spitting projectiles at you, you might have to jump over them before, but then you get the ability to cut through them. And it's all about keeping the movement and momentum going. But as far as this song goes, it's just really catchy melody and it makes perfect sense because it's that first big level.
Catchy is, no, that's not a lie. Yeah. I can't put my finger on what game it sort of reminds me of in its 8-bit form at the very least. Because it does sound like something I feel like I'm familiar with, but I can't put my finger on it.
I mean, tying it back to Jake Kaufman and Shovel Knight isn't totally, off. It makes a lot of sense. Like, kind of, again, it's the focus on melodies that you need to when you have these limited instruments and this limited sort of scope of your tracks. But man, it's not the only catchy song on this soundtrack, that's for sure. I mean, Rainbow Dragon Eyes did a really good job of like, each world is really defined by these songs and you'll have them in your head for a long, long time. Especially, I found, with the second track here on our Critical 5, Bamboo Boogaloo and Bamboo Boogaloo 2. This is certainly one of the faster tracks on the album, but it's also, I think, the catchiest melody overall. This is in the Bamboo Creek level, and so it's odd to get this really dance feel. I mean, we're talking about like that extreme chiptune dance metal, like, yup, this is that to a T. Maybe a slightly odd fit for a jungle But I think especially when the 16-bit comes in, you kind of get the sort of feel of those instruments. Like that's really jungle fitting. Again, there's only so much you can do. I think the way I would interpret it is with, 8-bit, like the focus is kind of narrow. There are only so many sounds that you can get out of these kind of instruments and sounds, but it's like the focus is really narrow and it kind of just blasts you like right down the middle. But with 16-bit, because the range of instruments can grow and what those instruments can be, but you're also expanding, like in a way, like the frequencies in a way, like the bass can be more powerful. The treble can be, higher up there. Like it's still intense, but like it kind of broadens a little bit. I think that's kind of, especially these sets of songs here with Bamboo Boogaloo and 2, like the 8-bit is intense, but really the 16-bit fleshes out what the instruments can be.
Like the instant it changes to 16-bit, it's just like the song opens up and now suddenly I'm hearing it in both audio channels instead of it just coming from the center, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's this weird feeling and also really cool.
Yeah.
And I think of all the ones you have on this list, I think this one's actually my favorite.
Okay.
Personally.
Yeah, no, it's definitely very, very catchy. I know a lot of people do like it, and it's one that I think had to be here. The third critical track is a set that's my favorite, actually. And it's The Frozen Peak and The Frozen Dark. This comes from the Glacial Peak level, all sorts of snow and ice, so you're definitely trying to stay in the air as much as possible, and be careful about climbing those cliffs because snow can fall on you and kind of stop your progress. But if you're trying to run as a ninja on ice, it may not go too well for you, so use those rope darts, use the cloud stepping, but man, just listen to this melody, like strong support in the bass and drums, but a great melody. And why is it that winter level songs just always rule? I mean, regardless of game, they're always so good. I think this one is no exception.
Because something about winter levels has to be good. Because it's never usually the level.
That's a pretty good point, yeah. I just really like this one. It gives me like big Ice Cap Zone vibes in a way. I just like it a whole lot. Maybe it's also the blues in the level, like the blue colors, and that fits really well with like kind of the vibe of the music. Not in a necessarily synesthesia way where you're matching colors to music, but like it just fits really well, and I really dig it. Number 4 on the critical tracks list, though, is not a pair because it is a boss battle that only takes place in the present/past. The 8-bit only here. This is the Arcane Golem. So when you get to the mountain, which is the Glacial Peak, and you ascend that, you get to the Tower of Time. And so it's almost like the halfway break in the game, but in more actuality, it's almost more like the third point. Because you're going through this game, it's 8-bit. Okay, you go through this level, you face a boss. Okay, you go through this level, you face a boss. And it's the Tower of Time where your skills are put to the test to see if you're really worth being the messenger of legend that can deliver that scroll. And this big golem, like big fist, just Hulk-like sort of being tests you. And it's a boss battle that is, I don't want to say it's really challenging, because like I certainly struggled with it, but it's one that it lays out pretty specifically what you have to do in the battle. The execution and the patience is just very tough in that sense. You have to be like perfect in a sense, especially if you don't have much experience with these games and you are like me and just not that good at games. Like it takes a lot of trial and error and making sure that you're honing your skills, because you have to make sure that you're ready for the rest of the game. So it's a big skill check. So you better get ready to hear this song a lot. And it's a good thing that this song is so good and so catchy.
It's very catchy, actually. I think this is my second favorite song. All 5 of these are really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to rank them, especially considering I don't know the full context. I haven't played the game.
Right.
But yeah, I think this might be my second favorite. And like I said with Shantae 2 weeks ago, games like this live and die by their boss themes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think this one lives fairly well.
It sure does. Yeah. And there are cool little tricks with like bending the pitch. Like it's really neat stuff that not everyone did, way back in the days of the NES and all that with this 8-bit song. But the pace that it goes with, it kicks in super hard. And yeah, I remember this so well because of all the times that I was trying. I remember being on a plane and being so frustrated with this, but it's like, I'm gonna do it. And it's a good thing this song is so great. But we get to the end of the game with the last of the 5 critical tracks. And we get another pair here with To Break the Curse and a melody to break the curse. So this comes from the music box level, where it's the progression to the final boss of the game. You really hear the tinkering of that music box sound, and it fits super well. Rainbow Dragon Eyes did an interview where he mentioned like they had this bigger plan for what they wanted to do with the music box section, with like where all these moving parts would have a part to play in all the different tracks, and it would be like really intricate. And like I guess they just ran out of time really, because they were trying to hit this specific release window. But you still get the sense with this song that like it's very mechanical in nature, and it's very driven. It isn't usually like what a final level feels like, but you do have this sense of progression that you're about to go and save the world in a way. Just it's in a different setting with the music box. And this is certainly one where the 16-bit, when that bass kicks in, like you feel it. You really hear the difference in the scope of the sound. It's super cool, especially going through this level. It's such a unique level, and the music complements it perfectly.
I kind of wish I could have heard that version they wanted to put in, though. That sounds really, really cool.
I wish I could have too. Maybe in a future game they'll have the time to put in those sort of bold ideas.
It sounds cool, and again, like it would have been an absolute nightmare to program.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, these were basically programmed by hand, but just very specifically. I mean, you play these 2 songs side by side, and like yeah, for every one of these that it has a pair, like they're right on. It's really remarkable. When it comes to tracks on the cutting room floor, I'll have a couple here. And again, they're pairs. So again, keep that in mind. One will go with Harness the Winds and Harnessing the Wind. this goes for the Howling Grotto level, which is this kind of like green, damp cave sort of environment. The player here is getting used to the wingsuit ability, where you can glide on those longer jumps, but also if you catch air and jump and then hold and you catch that air, you can soar up and then kind of glide down. So it's a really crucial ability of the messenger, that the ninja that you have, and you're kind of learning all that. So it makes sense that the music is it's this bouncy and whimsical kind of melody. Apparently it's the dev's favorite track. The kind of like the dev teams there. I'd say especially the 16-bit version, because it's just, I think you can really tell the difference between 8 and 16-bit here. Probably bigger. It's a bigger range, a bigger jump than any of the other songs on this soundtrack.
I agree.
And then the other one that I would pick is Fire and Earth and Water and Wind. This goes with the Elemental Skylands level. And it's a level where you're riding a goddamn dragon to access these elemental-themed floating islands. You're taking down these seals to help basically access the final area of the game. It's kind of one of the last things you do before that music box level, because it's like one of the final music notes that you have to acquire for this melody. I really think that probably some of the inspiration for this level, at least, you gotta, draw comparisons, especially when you're riding on the dragon and you're firing fireballs at enemies. You gotta look at Wing Fortress from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And whereas we've talked about on a past episode with that song, it's the boom, 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 the DOS. Like, how is this so different? Like, at least this song is really badass. And the song suits this kind of level very well. But yeah, it's when you play this level especially, it's hard not to think of Wing Fortress. So what will I never forget about this game? I think honestly it's the soundtrack for one. The method of time travel, the jumping between 8 and 16-bit, and how it does on the fly. Rainbow Dragon Eyes, Eric Brown, did such a good job with making every song memorable in some capacity, catchy, dancey, gets your toes tapping, you have it in your head for days. This is easily one to put on a playlist and just, you keep on listening. But it's one that I remember as, there are some games where like you'll start playing games, you'll start for a little bit and it's like, I'm not really feeling it. The Messenger is a game where it's like, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to beat it. There are bosses that made me question that, but I'm going to beat it. I'm having too much fun playing this. And when it opens up in the Metroidvania, forget about it. It's so fun. Combat, traversal, it's so unique. Absolute kudos to Thierry Boulanger to fulfill that childhood dream, make that all come true, and for Rainbow Dragon Eyes to give it such a kick-ass score. Everyone on the team did such a great job. Again, I mentioned a lot of people, it's like, oh, Celeste, best indie game of 2018, and they're not wrong. Like, it is a very, very good one. But for my money, what I prefer to play, give me The Messenger any day. Like, that was my favorite game, my favorite indie game of 2018, certainly.
Hopefully one day I will play it.
I say play it on Switch. It's a great way to play it, especially on the go, especially if you're at a family wedding and you have to take it with you on a flight. And when you're in their Airbnb, essentially, and you're trying to kill time, hook it up to that TV and have a great time. It's so good.
I will actually be in that exact situation in the next month or so I'll keep that in mind.
I think that's how you need to play the game then. Well, certainly a focus this week on indie games, and we go from squares and rectangles to ninjas, but it's, the focus on synth and chiptunes and how they can all blend together, and the exploration of, modern day string sounds with little chip bits, but also the explorations of 8-bit to 16-bit. So just a great week for indie games on this show, really. I mean, and any final thoughts?
You need to play my game and I need to play your game, basically, I think is what it boils down to.
Yeah, that checks out. And you listening at home, pick which one, pick both games. I mean, play these games. We really bring these games up as a mention of a love for the music in the game soundtrack. But at the whole, it's the music is experienced alongside the game. And I think that's a really important part of it as well. So that'll do it for this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at The Dobaga. You can find the video version of this show on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, whereas the MP3 version is over on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. Of course, the podcast version with those MP3s are over on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. So bring us in your cars, in your earbuds at work, or if you're going out for a run or anything like that. Please, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave us a review on those podcast pages as well. We'd really appreciate that.
And tell your friends.
Yes, please do that. Share our posts and interact with us on social media over at Soundchat OST. And, you can leave feedback for the shows. You can leave suggestions on which games you'd like to hear us cover. Certainly, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff there. I'll play you out with a fan cover of a song from The Messenger this week. Usually we go from either, OC Remix or on YouTube. I found the band Lame Genie on YouTube. And along with their music, they did covers of video game music, especially this track from The Messenger, which is my favorite. This is their take on The Frozen Light from that Glacial Peak level. Thank you so much for listening to Original Soundchat. Take care.